for joining. I am Bhairavi Desai. I'm the executive director of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance. I'm gonna spotlight myself for everyone because we're gonna be spotlighting all the speakers as it's their turn. So we're here this morning because the attorneys and um, advocates at the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund are putting out a report today of a survey of 350 drivers who've been deactivated. The surveys were conducted by the Taxi Workers Alliance as part of a deactivation justice clinic that we organized. For us, our conversations were all individual. We talked to each driver individually, a number of staff, as well as some of our members who volunteered for the day. We interviewed each driver individually, and it was one standard Google form. And so all we did was, type in the choices from the drivers themselves. We did not analyze any of the data or run any of the data. For that, we turned it all over to the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, AALDEF. AALDEF is a 50-plus-year-old civil rights organization. It is one of the leading civil rights organizations in our country. We went specifically to AALDEF because of its long history of fighting for civil rights issues. We know that workers' rights, civil rights, and immigrant rights are interconnected. You really cannot separate these three forces, especially for an industry like ours, where the majority of the workers are immigrant and people of color. And, deactivations for drivers is, of course, fundamentally an economic issue because you lose your job. And when you lose your job, it has, severe economic consequences. But it's also a civil rights issue. Economic justice is also a civil rights issue. And it's a civil rights issue, particularly in this context where you have been accused of wrongdoing, but you don't really have a proper avenue to defend yourself. And especially in a moment of our country history where due process is being questioned, and it's especially being questioned for people that look like drivers, are part of the driver community, people that are predominantly immigrants, those that have not been born in this country. It's being questioned for the working class in general. And so this felt to us like a really important moment to talk to a leading civil rights organization and attorneys about what we see, about an issue that we see as so at the heart of it, so much about due process and civil rights. And so we're extremely thankful to the staff at AALDEF that took our query so seriously and really devoted their time to analyzing this data, which included both statistics as well as comments that drivers made in the surveys themselves. And so without anything further, I do want to turn it over to our guest speakers. And to begin with, we will be first hearing from the representatives at AALDEF, Niji Jain, who's a legal director, and Elizabeth Koo, who is the interim economic justice and workers' rights director. Take it away, Elizabeth and Niji.
Thank you so much. Good morning, everyone, and thank you for being here today. Again, Elizabeth Koo. I'm an attorney at AALDEF, the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund, and our legal director, Niji Jain, is here with me today. Bhairavi, thank you so much for the introduction. And just by way of a little bit of additional context, we're a national organization that's based here in New York City, and it is our mission to protect and promote the civil rights of Asian Americans and really all communities. We work with partners and communities like the Taxi Workers Alliance across the country, and we're trying to fight for social, economic, racial justice in the areas of immigrant rights, workers' rights, voting rights, housing justice, just to name a few. And specifically, our economic justice program has fought for fair treatment and better conditions for workers through litigation, advocacy, organizing, and education. And we're really glad to be here to be able to share some key findings from AALDEF's report, which will be released today, Deactivated Without Cause. And as mentioned, it was prepared based on surveys of nearly 350 Uber and Lyft drivers. We're talking hundreds of drivers. So I will kick things off by walking through some of our key findings, and then I'll turn it over to our legal director to discuss additional key findings and recommendations. So I want to share 3 important findings from the data that are included in our report. First, drivers are being deactivated without notice. Second, drivers are being deactivated without due process. Third, drivers are trying to challenge their deactivations, but the current systems in place for appeals, they're just not working. So on this first issue of no notice, imagine waking up for work one morning, opening up your app, getting ready for work, and seeing that your account's been deactivated. You're locked out of your account, really locked out of your job and your livelihood and your income overnight without warning. The data shows that that's how deactivations happened for a majority of surveyed drivers. Specifically, Uber gave no notice to 70% of the drivers it deactivated. Lyft gave no notice to 76% of the drivers it deactivated. The data also shows that surveyed drivers, we're talking about long-time, high-performing workers. Many of the deactivated drivers had ratings above 4.8 and completed thousands of rides. I want to illustrate this experience of not getting notice from a driver's perspective. We saw over 32,000 trips, and suddenly I'm no longer a safe driver. Driving for over 20 years, and suddenly Uber found me to be unsafe. On our second key finding, no due process for drivers. So imagine you're that worker who's suddenly been deactivated. Imagine getting no details, no dates, no evidence about the allegation that triggered the deactivation. Again, the data showed that this was the experience for many drivers. Drivers are losing their livelihoods based on allegations alone, no ability to defend themselves. And when drivers try to ask for explanations, they typically only learned that it was a customer complaint. No dates, no incident descriptions, no opportunity to review or challenge any evidence before losing their jobs. To illustrate this evidence, from a driver's perspective again, Lyft didn't even give me the date of the incident. So even if I have a dash cam in my car, I can't even defend myself if they don't provide that information. They can just come against you with anything, and it's very hard for the driver to defend themselves. In some cases, we found that where drivers managed to learn more about the allegations, they reported that the accusations were not true. Accused of DUI, but I've never smoked or had a drink my entire life. Passenger vomited in my car and then complained about sexual harassment. Told the passenger I couldn't make an illegal U-turn. She got out in the middle of the street, cursed, slammed the door. Right away, I was deactivated. Had to cancel a ride because passenger luggage wouldn't fit in the car, and then was accused of sexual misconduct. Finally, on the issue of ineffective appeal systems, again, imagine you're the driver who's been deactivated. You don't have enough information about what led to it. You're trying to do whatever you can to find out more, but nothing is working. The data shows that this was the experience for most deactivated drivers. Drivers pursued multiple channels to challenge their deactivations, emailing, calling, going to company offices, going to the Independent Drivers Guild, an Uber and Lyft funded entity that says it helps drivers with deactivations, using the in-app appeal option. Those options almost never worked. According to the data, more than 9 in 10 drivers remain deactivated. Specifically, 95% of Uber drivers reported that despite appeals, they stayed deactivated. 98% of Lyft drivers reported that they remained deactivated. In one driver's case, when he found out, he went to Uber right away. They told him it was a customer complaint, but didn't say who, when, where, what happened, but the deactivation was permanent. He went back to Uber's offices 3 or 4 times. He went to IDG the same year, and he was told his deactivation appeal was in the system. He had to wait. That driver was left waiting for years and remains deactivated. Based on this critical data set, drivers are losing their livelihoods without notice, without an explanation, without any real chance to defend themselves. And that simply violates basic principles of fairness and worker dignity. I'm going to turn it over to Niji, our legal director, to share more.
Hey everyone, and thanks, Elizabeth. So yeah, let's talk a little bit about why this matters. There are, of course, economic and personal impacts to this lack of process. Drivers reported that they lost their primary income overnight. Specifically, 95% of surveyed drivers said that they depended on driving as their family's main income. And so, here, unlike in other cities where driving for Uber or Lyft might be a side hustle or, a temporary gig, in New York City, what we learned is that for the vast majority of drivers, they're working full-time to support multiple family members. The economic impacts included missed rent, car payments, falling behind on groceries and other essentials. Specifically, with respect to vehicle expenses, 88% of drivers bought cars specifically to work for Uber and Lyft. And so, unlike in other jobs, when it comes to these driving platforms, drivers are investing their own personal money to work. And when they're deactivated, they don't just lose their income, they also lose out on that capital investment that they made. So they fall into debt and are left with bills and no path to appeal. All of that economic harm caused severe personal and emotional distress. We heard from drivers that they were unable to support themselves, their family members, and that the harm was far-reaching. In their own words, lost $30,000 on a car, and my daughter had to drop out of college. Another driver said, my mother is very sick and she needs medicine. I cannot send money as I used to. One more. I was a broke man and lost the whole family. Wife divorced me because of lost income. And this isn't just an economic and social justice issue. The data shows a racialized pattern of economic exclusion. 95% of surveyed drivers identified as people of color, and 69% were Asian. This is consistent with how systemic racism and implicit bias work. When drivers can be terminated based on unsubstantiated customer complaints, we know that those complaints are going to disproportionately target drivers of color, drivers who speak with an accent, drivers who wear a turban, ones who have a Muslim-sounding name. We at AALDEF have seen these patterns in our advocacy, both for workers and for victims of discrimination and hate violence over years and decades. And we know that silence allows these patterns to continue. So turning to recommendations, what can we do? This report is both a warning and a call to action. Drawing from our legal experience, we're making 3 recommendations today around process, transparency, and accountability. So first, there needs to be a process for drivers to understand the basis for their deactivation, an opportunity to respond and appeal, and crucially, a standard to ensure that decisions that are made about deactivations are supported by real evidence. Our second recommendation, look, while the data that we collected and analyzed from over 300 drivers gives an important snapshot about the reality for drivers, there are far more drivers out there with stories that we didn't hear and that we haven't reported on. And what we recommend to fill that gap is greater transparency around Uber and Lyft's workers and their processes. Third recommendation, to restore dignity for this workforce and to counteract the power imbalance between independent drivers on the one hand and multinational companies on the other, we're recommending that there should be accountability mechanisms for platforms that engage these drivers, have them invest tens of thousands of dollars of their own money to work for the app, and then drop them without cause. So we're looking to our policymakers and our regulators to act on these recommendations. And we are eager to hear from the council member and from the DCWP about policy solutions, including their experience working in other industries to help ensure that workers are not fired without legitimate reason, transparency, or due process. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Niji and Elizabeth. We're now going to turn to Councilman Krishnan. Councilman, you're able to unmute yourself.
Yes. Hi, everyone. It's
Great.
good to see you all. And thank you so much to AALDEF and to Taxi Workers Alliance for pulling together this briefing too. I'm actually walking on my way to City Hall now, so that's why I'm on the move, but I did want to join. And I want to first thank the whole team at AALDEF. Niji, it's good to see you on, and thank you so much for your and your colleagues' great work on this report. And of course, to Bhairavi, and all the drivers, you are the inspiration and the energy behind this fight and calling attention to an issue that I know, and I hear from everybody, is just the most important and critical issue facing drivers since the medallion crisis. So, I wanted to add a couple things. I think, as the report makes very clear, and AALDEF has now quantified with numbers and data what we have been talking about and what drivers have been saying for so long, which is that this is, as I mentioned, the most urgent issue facing drivers in the city since the predatory lending crisis with the medallion scheme. But on top of that, we're seeing how fundamentally one-sided and unfair the deactivation fight is. More than 70 to 76% of drivers being deactivated by Uber and Lyft. Over 90% of them not able to get reinstated despite their appeals. The fact that over 90% of drivers are drivers of color, it tells you what we are up against here, and the way in which both Lyft and Uber have created a one-side process that is fundamentally about profit and fundamentally about subjugating drivers to their own whims and their own profit-making tactics. That's why I think it's so important that we pass Intro 276 and why we are on track to do so. What this is about, as I've always said, is creating a fundamental due process, a due process right that is enshrined in our legal system and that people face in every other context, and it's no different in the employment context as well. Right now, Uber and Lyft are the prosecutor, judge, and jury of these fights, and we see what that produces. Overwhelming results against drivers, a system that is fundamentally stacked against them, a system where they have no notice whatsoever before the charges are leveled against them, and where they have to, it's the burden is on them to reverse a decision that has already been made. In other words, they are found guilty before they even have their chance to establish their innocence. No process works this way, and you see the results of a system that is stacked this way. Our bill will create a fair process by giving drivers ample notice, by giving them the chance to make their case and present evidence before this ultimate decision is made that affects their livelihood, their ability to provide for their family. And in doing so, it removes the process from a biased company controlled tribunal and puts it in front of a city agency so that it is a neutral process. You have a neutral arbiter to make sure that drivers have a notice and an opportunity to be heard before such a fundamental and drastic decision is made that affects their lives. And that clearly is effectively a final determination of their employment status for so many of them. I represent the district that has the largest driver population in all of New York City. I know how crucial this issue is. That is why I want to take on this fight with the drivers, and I'm excited to fight together for its eventual passage. But I do want to thank AALDEF once again for really highlighting with numbers and data what we have been saying for all along. Intro 276 isn't simply a benefit that we want to confer. It is a necessity to make sure that drivers' rights and their livelihood are not trampled upon by billion-dollar corporations. Thanks, everyone.
Here, here. Thank you so much, Councilman Krishnan. Thank you for joining us from the streets. I am going to, as the councilman said, the agency, that this bill would establish legal rights for drivers for the first time in their fight against unfair deactivations. And the agency that would oversee the regulations is the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. So I'm really so thankful and honored to introduce our next speaker, who's the Deputy Commissioner Carlos Ortiz of DCWP.
Great. Thank you. And good morning, everybody. My name is Carlos Ortiz. I work for Commissioner Vildevera Mayuga at the Department of Consumer and Worker Protection. First and foremost, let me start by saying how honored I am that I've been invited here, particularly to be joined by all these workers as well, and taking this time out of their day for this critical issue. And as well, the work of the New York Taxi Workers Alliance, AALDEF, and as well as allies like Councilmember Krishnan, who has just been steadfast throughout the years on this issue. So thank you very much. At the Department of Consumer Worker Protection, we ensure that consumers who've been exploited have recourse, that workers have a passionate defender of their rights, and that folks that need help with their financial health have those resources available to them. And particularly on the piece about workers' rights, I would say that we have delivered tremendous successes for workers, over $50 million in worker relief in just the past few years. Turning to this bill is incredibly important. We are so supportive of ensuring that these protections are put in place for for-hire vehicle drivers. Arbitrary deactivations, unfair deactivations, they are financially devastating for workers and their families. And in fact, they're harmful for workers and their families. So for us, we look forward to being able to implement this law, to standing up these protections and ensuring what folks have already mentioned: clear standards, fair standards, notice, understanding what the rules of the workplace are. For us, having those issues are basic concepts for workers to be successful in their daily lives. So I really like to thank as well that this report is critical, again, to establishing the factual record for the need for this legislation. Day in and day out, we hear stories from workers about losing their jobs, not being able to provide for their families, arbitrarily, unfairly. And I think ultimately we stand alongside them and the organizations here today to make sure that that reality no longer takes place in New York City. So I thank you for the time, and I look forward to any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you, Commissioner Ortiz. Okay, I'm now gonna call upon our final speaker before we get to the Q&A. A Taxi Workers Alliance member, Saif Aiza. Brother Saif, you can unmute yourself.
Hello, good morning. Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Good morning.
Okay,
Great.
thanks for giving me this opportunity. I want to thank everybody that showed up and also trying to work for us and help us. Everybody in their name and their title. I am a member of the New York Workers Taxi Alliance. My story is very catastrophic. I was unfairly deactivated by Uber. Now I only have Lyft. Since I only drive for Lyft, my earnings dropped by half. And I'm struggling right now since COVID. After COVID, I cannot pay my rent. I'm struggling to pay my car payments, my insurance. I'm drowning in so many debts. I'm in the process of filing for bankruptcy, and this is the file right here. And the results of this put so much stress on my mental health. My health is deteriorating right now, where all my thinking is just worrying about how am I going to pay my bills. That's all I think about, day and night. What is even worse is how do I face my kids when I cannot put food on the table because of these unfair deactivations that put so much financial instability on me. Unfair deactivations make my life miserable. We need a bill that will protect drivers from these unfair deactivations. We pay for everything. We pay for our maintenance. We pay for the car. We pay for the insurance. I pay my car payment. I do everything on my own. And all of a sudden, you just wake up one day, you just deactivated. You don't know the reason. You don't know why. They don't even give you a notice. With all these expenses and all these losses in the financial crisis I've been through since I was deactivated, we asked the councils to make and approve this bill. And we need this bill definitely. A bill that will protect drivers from unfair deactivations and will allow us to defend ourselves. I'm not the only one who's going through this because of these unfair deactivations. So many drivers does, and so many stories that will make you so emotional. A false complaint from a passenger who discriminates, or someone who just doesn't like the way you look. And for driving for these companies, Lyft alone, I have over 12 or 13,000 trips. They don't care about us, so does Uber. And these are the stories that we have to go through. Like, how many stories do you want to hear? Like, what do we have to do? I feel so emotional right now. I don't even want to cry in front of everybody because of what I'm going through. I have a wife, I have a kid, I have rent. My rent alone is $2,600. Sometimes I didn't even pay my rent last month. These are the stories that we have to go through because these unfair deactivations and a customer that will just come in and they just may be late or who knows what they're going through and they take all their problems on you with one false complaint. We have to go through this. We need a bill that will protect us. We need a due process. We need to defend ourselves because it's making our life so miserable. And then we just go like a roller coaster every day. Just look at this. Look at this. I cannot even pay my electric bill. And there's so many bills over here that if I show you, you wouldn't even believe it. I feel like crying right now. This is the story of unfair deactivations and a law that doesn't protect us from these giant companies that just suck our blood. I don't want to continue and just make everybody feel sorry for me because, look, I have a final termination notice. I cannot even pay this. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Brother Saif. And I mean, as you said, thank you for sharing your truth and your pain because it really reflects, as you said, the reality of every single Uber and Lyft driver across this city. These companies are billionaires, they're household names, and they've become household names because of the blood and the sweat and the tears of the drivers. And all we're asking for is the most basic dignity, that you should be given a warning. You should be given the benefit of the doubt. You should know what the charges are that you are facing. And you should be given an opportunity to defend yourself, to defend your job, to defend your good name, to defend your future, so you can have a life without long-term debt. We've heard in the media where Lyft has made statements which really imply that they don't want to have to spend resources on this issue. That's not shocking. Lyft doesn't even have an office in New York City. New York City, this is the biggest market, the most lucrative market for these global companies. We call it the breadbasket. This is where they grow the field that feeds the rest of the company across the country. Where in other places they might take a loss, they're able to venture out because New York City feeds them. And what feeds them specifically are the hands of the drivers. And so, we're really thankful to AALDEF for putting this report together, which, amplifies the voices and the experiences of the drivers. I mean, even for us, as people that, deal with this issue every single day, we hear the stories from our members directly. We see the pain, we see the impact on their lives, on their families' lives. I can't tell you the number of times when drivers been deactivated and they don't come alone to the office. They'll come with a family member, where people feel like they need family members to really validate in order to explain how significantly, largely, they're going to be impacted by the loss of a job. And so this report is really important to us to show that, the collective voice of the drivers. I mean, 350, as Niji said, is an important, it's there's so many thousands more drivers that are impacted. This is one representative sample of, that really illustrates how widespread this issue is for drivers. I mean, for Uber and Lyft drivers, the two main issues, they're two sides of one coin. On one side, it's about your payment on every trip, where you don't earn enough money. The companies keep the lion's share of what the customers pay. And on the other side of that coin is job security. On one hand, they don't pay you enough. On the other hand, they make you pay for all the operating expenses out of pocket, and they could take away your job from you without even a moment's notice. And so with Intro 276, drivers would finally have the right to notice, the right to progressive discipline, which means a history of notices and trainings, the right to due process. And so that would mean fundamentally, an independent appeal, an appeal process that is not controlled by the same companies themselves that are seeking to take your job away from you and have lodged accusations against you without showing you all of the evidence. And so really, again, this is a basic issue of, economic justice, of economic stability, economic security, and it is a basic issue of worker dignity. Nobody should get to point the finger at you and not have to prove those allegations. We don't allow that in our families. We don't allow that in our criminal justice system. Why should we allow it in our economy and in the most fundamental relationship that adults have, which is to their job? And so we need the city to pass Intro 276 for the largest private sector workforce of New Yorkers. There's over, as we speak, there's over 85 to 90,000 Uber and Lyft drivers that are working. They collectively serve over 800,000 people every single day. They are predominantly immigrants and people of color. Other studies have shown that many complaints that drivers face are motivated by racism and bigotry by consumers. And so, we need policies in place. And we've tried for years, but Uber and Lyft are not going to do this on their own. And that's why we need legislation. We need the might of the city to say that this is a city that supports workers, that believes in the dignity of the working class, that believes in due process, especially for immigrants at a time when that is under severe attack, and a city that says that these fights are actually fundamental and they're basic protections, for a workforce that brings so much wealth into the city itself. So with that, I want to turn it over to any members of the media that might have questions. Again, you could go to React on your screen and just select raise hand. And so then we would be able to call on you. You can also, members of the media can also post a message in the chat so that we could see your questions there. We'd be able to call on you there. Okay. Okay. So if not, that, totally fine. I know a number of you have reached out to us directly. And so we will also be able to put you in touch with folks at AALDEF. Of course, you can reach out to DCWP and the councilman directly. Thank you, Stuart. As Stuart just posted in the chat, the AALDEF report is going to be live on the AALDEF website. And so there's a link to that report in the chat. And we'll also, to all of you members of the media, we'll also be sending that out in a press release shortly following this briefing. Okay. Thank you to all the drivers that have joined. I know that a number of you may be looking to post about your deactivation. You can contact the union office if you still have not contacted the companies and need help with an appeal. I know we're here because the vast majority of you have already filed an appeal and it's not gotten anywhere. And that's why we need Intro 276 to pass so that drivers can finally have an opportunity for a real independent appeal. Okay. I don't know if any of our prior speakers have any last words to add. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and close out the briefing. Elizabeth or Niji, anything else on the report that you'd like to add? You could just unmute yourself.
Thank you for that opportunity, Bhairavi. I just want to underscore, highlight, reiterate the key points that have been made today. With more than 80,000 active rideshare drivers in New York City, and with the benefit of this really valuable snapshot from surveys and stories from drivers, the data really shows, and I thank you in advance for reading the report, because you'll find that there's a serious crisis affecting the critical people who are moving this busy city. The data shows drivers are losing their jobs, their livelihoods, without notice, explanation, any real chance to defend themselves. So we do need to fix this unfair system, again, with transparency, accountability, and basic fairness. And I'm really grateful for all the speakers and for all the drivers for being here today. Thank you for giving us a chance to highlight this important data.
Thank you, Elizabeth. Carlos, I see that Amir Kafagi of Documented has a question for DCWP. Amir, you can also unmute if you like.
Hey,
Yes, great.
everybody. Nice to see everybody, and this is great work, and I'm so glad the study came out. I'm just curious, what recommendations did DCWP have in terms of enforcement of the bill? Would there be any sort of penalties for Uber and Lyft if they deactivate people's anything in terms of severance pay?
Thank you, Amir. I think some of the items that my colleagues mentioned with respect to fair standards, notice, opportunities for appeals. I think those are critical to really uplifting the workplace conditions, so to speak. And then, but thinking back to really what or Brother Saif mentioned in terms of the impact that these deactivations have on folks. I mean, I think that story it's told 1,000 times over about the harm that deactivations cause. And I think ultimately we need to stop deactivations as being a normal course of business. It cannot be a normal course of business to arbitrarily deactivate somebody and essentially put a family out without a job. So for us, I think we really want to think strategically and effectively about how we disincentivize as much as possible a deactivation happening in the first place. Severance pay, I think, for every deactivated worker, I think is a key component of that. And to be clear, severance pay that does not at all limit a worker's right to reinstatement. Ultimately, we acknowledge too that workers, the number one thing they want to do is to be able to work. They want their jobs. So the right to reinstatement is critical. But I think at the front end, we need to disincentivize as much as possible arbitrary deactivations from happening by requiring a severance pay component. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner. Just to underscore something really quickly, I know the fundamental problem here is there is no existing law. And so, for example, even if a driver files an appeal, in Uber doesn't allow you to go to an arbitrator, but let's say for Lyft, under the Lyft contract, driver can go to an arbitrator. But okay, you go to an arbitrator, but there's no law that says that Lyft had to provide all of the evidence, that the burden of proof, is on the company, that they had to use, progressive discipline, right, to show a history of notices or trainings to the driver. None of that exists right now. There's nothing there's no law that says that if your deactivation was found to be unfair, that they have to order a reinstatement. And so that's why, our organization, the Taxi Workers Alliance, has been organizing over the last 3 years with Councilman Krishnan on Intro 276. This would be the first law that would be established. The city has established similar legal protections for fast food workers. That is, that is really what the bill is modeled after, the protections for fast food workers. And, we know in the fast food industry where, workers are largely, minimum wage workers, so, low paid workers, have a lack of job security, particularly around scheduling and just the loss of jobs. Well, imagine with drivers, you experience that while you have paid for the capital expenses to go to work. So you've paid for everything up front and you still have no sense of security. And so, for us, there's a real urgency in the need for these kinds of protections for the city to extend them from fast food workers now today to, app dispatch drivers for Uber and Lyft. I see Jose, you have your hand up from Jose Martinez of the city. You can unmute, yes.
Hi, everyone. I just wanted to go back to something that was done a few months back at the TLC level. What was that level of protection for workers, and what would this proposed legislation do that is more significant than what's already passed at the TLC level?
Oh, well, nothing's been passed. Sorry, thank you, Jose. Nothing's been passed at the TLC level. I mean, TLC does not address deactivations at all. And that, and we're not looking for the TLC to be the agency that would regulate this. Intro 276 would be, city council bill. I think the councilman is not, oh, okay, I think he's actually just coming back on, so I might turn it over to him to answer the question. Councilman Krishnan, do you want to
Yes,
respond?
sorry
Jose?
about that.
Yes, it's okay.
Yes, Jose, do you mind repeating the question again? Sorry.
Sorry, Jose, you can go ahead and unmute.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yep.
Yes.
Some months back, TLC, this is a story I wrote in the city back in June. There were some new rules passed at the TLC that would keep the companies from bumping drivers off the apps on
Right.
short notice. So, what of that rule, and how much stronger would this one be? And is that kind of ineffective, that TLC rule?
Well, I think, the issues are related and they're both important, but they're also a bit different too. I think
Got it.
prior, TLC rules were focused more on utilization rates and things like that. I think what we're doing here is even more fundamental. The billion-dollar corporations here, for their own profit rationales, seek to, at whim, effectively fire drivers with no process. And what our bill is addressing is that that is unethical, it is wrong, and it's harming a workforce that is delivering for this city every single day. And so what we're saying here is, regardless of what your claimed motivations may be, these companies have to follow a set and fair process before they seek to make their final decisions on drivers, and a process that is also fundamentally fair, in front of a neutral tribunal too. And that's what we're really trying to address here. And again, it is not so unrelated to the utilization rate fight, but I think here we're getting at something more fundamental, which is the ability of drivers to do their work without the fear of losing their jobs overnight.
Thank you.
I would just want to echo that as well. And ultimately, what we're trying to do here is raise the floor, establish a process for workers. The Department of Consumer Worker Protection, we currently enforce just cause for fast food workers right now, and we have seen the positivity that has had for that industry. I think we need to expand that here, and we're very supportive of this legislation because of those reasons.
Thank you, Commissioner, and thank you, Councilman. Jose, just a quick clarification. Those rules were what TLC oversees are driver pay rules. So the minimum that drivers are paid on each trip per minute and per mile. And so the utilization rate, which is a function of the driver pay rules, it allows drivers to essentially be paid for all the hours that they're working, including for, their empty time. And so Uber and Lyft were trying to game those rules to get out of paying drivers more on every trip. And so they engaged in this practice of what's called lockouts. So lockouts could be, it could be like, throughout your shift, right? It could be, at the beginning of your shift, the middle of your shift. It could be for a couple hours and then they let you back on. Deactivations are more long-term, and they could be permanent. They could be temporary if you're able to get yourself reinstated. We've also seen, and we've heard testimony from drivers at city council hearings where you could be reactivated and then they deactivate you again. So a deactivation is more longer term. It could be a temporary suspension or even become a permanent revocation. Also, the deactivations are linked more to, where the company says it's more about, complaints or driver's performance. But again, the reason we're here is, so these could be allegations lodged against the drivers, but the drivers are not given the proper right to defend themselves. In many cases, as the AALDEF report found, drivers don't even know what the actual allegation is, like why they're being deactivated. And there's no independent right to appeal that deactivation. And so while the TLC regulates the pay rules and the lockouts were an issue of driver pay, Intro 276 at the council would establish first-time rights under the law to give Uber and Lyft drivers some job security, due process protections against unfair firings. Again, firings that could be short-term, but could also be permanent revocations. I don't know if you had any follow-up, but you could unmute.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it, the clarification.
Okay, great. Thank you. Okay, I'm sorry, brothers and sisters, we're just taking questions from the members of the media right now. So if there are any reporters. Okay, and I know we're on time. Thank you. I know the councilman, you have a I think you have a hearing to get back to. Thank you, Councilman Krishnan, Commissioner Ortiz of DCWP. Thank you so much, Elizabeth Koo and Niji Jain of the Asian American Legal Defense and Education Fund for your work on this report, for valuing the voices of the drivers, from recognizing the injustice, the workers' rights, immigrant rights, and really civil rights that are at stake here for the drivers. Thank you, everybody. Anyone from the media that still needs to reach out to us, please feel free to email us directly, either to AALDEF or to the Taxi Workers Alliance. And my last thank you I want to say to all of the drivers that took the time to join today, and most especially to Brother Saif, who spoke with such power to really relay what is at stake for the drivers, and both the pain, but also the promise and the hope that we see in Intro 276. Thank you so much, brothers and sisters. Thank you, everybody, for joining.